Well, welcome to our November edition Structural Modeling Conference. We're open discussion and open for subjects from all participants. So, with that, what would you like to talk?
We're getting a lot of echo.
We seem to be
So,
getting back again.
Getting feedback again.
Yeah, Jack's joined us, and we now get feedback.
Okay. There must be some type of. There we go. Okay. All right. So now are we getting feedback?
No.
Jack just left.
Okay. Well, I think it's difficult to figure out exactly how to make these hookups, so it takes time. So what would people like to talk about?
Well, I can tell you that I'm interested in what Kevin's doing in actual, real experience with real groups with real problems. And I think the other thing that I'm interested in is implementation issues of scale, and any thoughts on both the social process of managing large groups and having access to the process of structuring, and how and I guess related to that then perhaps is the direction you're going, Joe, in actually having a web-based system is thinking about the numbers that would be possible to use it on the web, in a distributed way. So if we had people around the world, is there an optimal number, or with the trial project you've got going, I'm willing to see if I could get some people to work on it. So those are, I guess, some of my thoughts this morning.
Well, that's interesting, Peter. Kevin, would you like to say anything about what you're doing now?
Sure. This past year, I've been in Cyprus about 5 months, about to hit my 6th month. And the previous trips, I was mostly working on grants. We wrote 3 grants to advance platforms for doing this type of work. They were European Union grants. We didn't get any of them. But in the process of writing the grant, we kind of developed future plans. Okay, hello.
Michael.
Hello. This has been, okay, Janet's going to try on her iPad, see if we can arrange things better that way.
Alrighty.
Yeah, because we couldn't get through on her computer. This will be another moment.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Oops.
Were they grants for general grants, Kevin, in terms of developing the platform for specific European projects? Because I'm involved in a couple of European projects and a UNESCO project, and I'm just wondering, if there's some opportunity to collaborate with you.
Okay.
To look at that. I mean, were they specific to particular disputes or problems, or were they in a more generic sense for the development of the platform?
Two of them were about advancing the platform. We were part of 2 different networks. And each grant had like a dozen partners. The partners were universities and in one case, a network of NGOs. And in both cases, there was to be advances in the software in order to be able to do larger scale engagements online. And then there was a pilot to use it. And so one project we had a network of hundreds of people across Europe that were involved in a type of youth endeavor. And so they signed up to use the platform on their project. And similarly, the other one was doing something, but they wanted to test collaboration across language barriers. So they had an angle on that. That was last year's grant work. This past few weeks, I spent a couple weeks training a team from Poland to become facilitators. They want to run a couple projects in Europe on what they're calling mobile youth. There's been this European program called Erasmus, which encourages students to go to university in other countries in Europe. And once they become mobile like that, they lose their sense of citizenship. They don't understand their political rights. They have trouble with their sense of identity. So they wanted to do deliberations about that set of problems. They were going to start in Poland and a couple other countries. And then we had another woman who's an archaeologist that works in the Ministry of Culture in Greece, that was also learning to become a facilitator as part of a graduate program at the University of Piraeus in Greece, where SD, Structured Democratic Dialogue, is taught as one of the methods in their system science program. The guy that runs that program, by the way, started the Hellenic System Science Society.
Oh, interesting.
And she wants to do a project on heritage management. How can they do a better job of managing archaeological museums? So that's what I've been doing the last few weeks. I'll be here for several more months. We're working on a couple different books. We have an agreement with Roxana Cardenas to rewrite the Handbook of Interactive Management, which she co-authored with John Warfield. That came out in like 1992. So we're rewriting that. And then we have something called the Structured Democratic Dialogue Playbook, which is a practical schedule of what to do to prepare to do an event. And then the stuff that's actually I find the most enjoyable is working on parallel algorithm for interpretive structural modeling, so that you can go asynchronous and larger scale with it.
Right.
And
well, that's an important. I guess that would start to address one of the questions I had about the way to deal with large groups across different time zones.
Right. Yeah, you have to go asynchronous, and when we don't have an algorithm for doing that.
Do you know?
The algorithm is based on a bunch of people coming up with one input.
Right.
By voting.
Right.
instead of everybody having individual inputs.
Right.
And there started to be work on this in the early 80s by the Japanese. They called it flexible ISM. And their application at the time was to compare a student's ISM about a subject with a teacher's ISM about the subject. And by looking at the difference, they thought they could understand something about what the teacher had to do more specifically with that student. But there wasn't much that came out after that. It could have continued working, I don't know. But last year I started doing agent-based modeling to simulate what a parallel algorithm might behave like, to get an idea of what other rules we need besides the basic math of ISM.
Kevin, do you know what relationships they used in the flexible ISM? Was it influences or?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know the logical properties of the relationships that they considered, and whether they just considered one. Is very interesting idea of comparing ISMs like that, but you'd think they would need to really simplify the whole thing.
How would that be? Would you see a graphical difference? I mean, would you show them and then would that lead to then just a discussion, or it'd be interesting to think through how that would. I'm thinking about this in terms of what we're doing with systems literacy and trying to bring different communities together: ocean scientists, earth scientists, atmospheric scientists, energy scientists, forest scientists, and maybe biology. Anyway, now different natural scientists and and systems people into a structured dialogue around the relative importance or priorities of different aspects of systems in the broadest sense, to help us or guide us towards some deeper, broader, more agreeable sense of what are important topics within systems, and with a particular focus to have one of the themes for the ISSS 2019 conference to be about this topic. And so anything that we can do to support and advance, the work that you're doing, Kevin, the work that Joe's doing, obviously by participating here, we're doing that, and giving feedback and thoughts.
Well, one of the ways that we're experimenting with scale is through some projects. One of the projects is called Reinventing Democracy in the Digital Era. And that is intended to engage about 1,000 people. And the project is run on 5 continents. Now, there was a dialogue in Europe, Latin America, the Middle East. I happen to be facilitating in that one, Africa, and Asia. And each event has a couple dozen people in it, and they go through a structured dialogue using ISM. And each person that's in the dialogue has 10 shadow participants. And the STD participants and the shadow participants all have access to a mobile phone app called Idea Prism. That was developed by the Cypriot team here at the Future World Center. And it allows you to state an idea and record a video about how you might clarify that idea. And then it encourages you to view the videos of other participants and you rate them. You rate it for desirability, feasibility, importance, and so forth. And so, so the idea, one of the models for scaling that we've been thinking of is the first big one. Well, it's not the first big one. It's the first international big one that we've done, where we use small pods and then fan out from the small pods. So we do the structured dialogue in the traditional way, but then we engage in a social networking way to further expand it. Other ways, another big project that they did here involved doing 10 dialogues about the same topic. And they did it in different villages in the wine country of Cyprus. So they were reusing the same design, but changing the people for each municipality.
And how many people were there in each municipality, do you know?
I don't know, but I'm guessing it was less than 30 per dialogue. They tend to go with a couple dozen people per dialogue here.
So what came out of that comparison across villages?
I'm not sure exactly. I haven't read up on that case. However, the cases that they do are all available online. They have over 100 structured dialogue cases that are documented. Many of them have reports, and a good number of them have journal articles that have been published about them. You can. Do
you have any links that you could share, or?
Yeah, hold on a second.
Also would like to hear more about your conclusions about the agent-based work.
Sure. Okay, I put the link in the chat box. That's the link to the cases. I'm just learning. I took a course with the Santa Fe Institute on agent-based modeling last year. And so I'm really just learning. I mean, I did the semester of work and then I started playing around with just basic ideas of how I would go about trying to simulate a large-scale dialogue with a parallel ISM, but I'm really just learning right now, so I don't have any good observations about it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you mean by parallel ISM? You mean multiple ISMs going on simultaneously, each with a group of agents, or?
No, there's a lot of configurations you could do. One way is you let everybody do their own ISM, and then you figure out how to aggregate the result. Another way is you ask people a pairwise question and they answer it, and another person asks a pairwise question and they answer it. And when you get kind of a critical mass, you log the answer, even though there's only a small sample of everybody that's involved in the dialogue. So that one uses sampling theory. Another way to do it is you let everybody work as a response to what area of the matrix needs the most information or would benefit the most from having information. And then people would respond to that, but they're going to respond to it at all different times. So you need some way to judge how to fill in an aggregate matrix when information is coming in different places at all different times. So there's
I think this is really important. I think this is kind of, frankly, I think this topic that we're talking about is of central importance. And I'm particularly interested in it because I believe it serves as a disciplined way to document, obviously, the approach that is taken, and to reinforce communities that perhaps don't normally have a voice of feeling like their voice. I mean, that's the whole purpose. I mean, I think I really would like to follow up on this, over the next couple of weeks with you, and see how we can do some supportive work in whatever way we can.
Sure.
I've got a question on the why it is that the focus is on obstacles to achieving something. I just clicked on some of the links there, and particularly looking at the Civil Society Dialogue, Co-Laboratory, and Pharmagusta.
Yeah.
Why is it that ISM and Warfield's work and so on focuses on obstacles? I mean, when we did the work at the National University of Ireland in Galway, it was all about what obstacles do you see to achieve a particular state, and it sort of injects a negativity that if you remove obstacles, that somehow you're going to get what you want. And I wonder how it fits with a more Ackoff kind of idealized design approach. And if anybody's got any comments on the relationship between asking this question about obstacles to achieving an ideal model, whatever that ideal model is. I mean, how do you describe the ideal model to think about obstacles, I guess? Is it not putting something before them?
Yeah, the origin of the orientation around doing obstacles or problems or challenges first goes back to the work of Hassan Özbekhan on what he called the problematique.
Right.
And the problematique was a word that he borrowed from Lavoisier, the multi-scientist back in the 1700s or something like that. And I think that it's an orientation from the model of science, using the model of science as a model of planning, that you have to identify a problem and then you can identify the solution. And it's, it doesn't accommodate the whole so-called appreciative inquiry branch of Vickers and
right,
and what the community development people out of Chicago call asset-based community development. They call this type of orientation around problems, deficit thinking. And instead, you could start with a set of directives, what needs to be done. Because in the reason that they developed asset-based community development was because for decades, people from universities came out into the neighborhoods and documented all the problems, and nothing ever changed about it.
Right.
And the people, because of that, and also because the people are living it every day, they knew the problems. They know the problems. They don't need them stated again.
Right.
And so they, the guy who started the asset-based approach, or what he called a strengths-based approach, was to say, let's document what's working. When's the last time something worked? And let's build them up, right? Because he was also trying to build up their sense of self and their ego, and
Yeah.
Whereas scientists in a university don't usually have that problem. They're not living sometimes homeless on the street. They're not hungry.
Right.
They're not having basic problems of life. And so they're not sensitized to the need to find hope. And so I'm an advocate of using the strengths-based approach or appreciative inquiry when you're in a situation like that. But if you're if you're in social situations, I think it's useful to do that. But if you're doing work, for example, I did a project 20 years ago on patient safety. And patient safety was just really becoming an issue for some smattering of academics who study different aspects of the problem. And in the medical community, they very much wanted to identify, go over the list of problems, and they wanted that model. So it depends on what your, the client organization or the client participants need,
Right. So, but given that one of the significant frames that Warfield picked up on, and Christakis and so on, and the sort of the evolution of this has been around this problematique focus.
Yeah.
How much does that shape, with the terms of sort of sensitivity to initial conditions, the way that the problem itself is structured, that is then, or is stated, should I say, and then is structured, and how much, if you're talking about an appreciative approach or an asset-based community development approach, what's working? Does it change the way that obviously will change the way the questions are asked, and therefore the responses, and therefore the way the situation is structured? And I just wonder about.
Well, I think in the asset-based approach, they're still addressing a problem,
Right.
and the problem is to increase hope. The things that Kevin said there. It's just not that the dialogue is not is asset-centered, because they have a sense that will be a better way to address the problem. So it's not that that problem identification is lacking. I think in any practical, applied, engineering or intervention activity, there's some kind of motivation that something needs to be improved, or there should be some collective
Right, but I mean, I think
consideration of something.
the assumption that by removing obstacles it's going to happen is sort of, I think there's a level.
That's another, that's more simplistic.
Well, I mean, but that was the experience. I mean, we spent a week there in Galway talking about ISM and obstacles, and it sets up a negative frame.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with that. I would think that sounds like it's not. The problem isn't that it's negative, but that it's naive. If they think that just by removing obstacles, something will.
Right, but what I'm saying is that for many, and I'm just looking at this one from Famagusta, many of the approaches that use ISM, structured modeling, use this term, what are the obstacles that prevent you from doing X?
Right.
And I'm saying that sets up a negative potential energy, and it makes an assumption that by removing obstacles, you may achieve what you want to achieve. And
isn't this the like the second stage of the idealized design? Don't you, or I don't know the numbered stages, but don't you start out by saying, imagining the way things you would like it to be, and then you try to reverse engineer and figure out what the obstacles are to achieving it?
Yeah, that's one model. You have an idealized state, and then what's keeping you from getting there, and then an action plan to address that.
Right.
That's one model of thinking. But I agree with Peter. It's a case I've been making to practitioners in our community for some years, especially because there's been a movement of our practitioners from doing work in the corporate world and the government world to doing more social engagements. And that was largely a political orientation of Christakis and Ken Bausch and Tom Flanagan. They wanted to do more social things. And, so I say, in the social realm, you should consider the strength-based approach instead of the deficit thinking.
Well, that really resonates. The idea of asset-based and deficit-based, but it seems like that's, as I said, it's not that doesn't start from awareness of a problem. It's just that
the problem's already known.
Exactly.
The problem's already known. Yeah.
So it's to some extent also, if science, describing, so one could say that there is also a scientific view, which if one took not the scientistic view, but a scientific view of appreciating how the world works, without focusing on solving a particular problem. That's maybe a third kind of tone that could be taken, so that one would be problem-centered, one would be asset-centered, and one would be understanding-centered. So, for example, I was thinking, Peter, with your wanting to bring the sciences together, I think there's a need for just integrating the different views of how the world works without it being either problem-focused or asset-focused, so that it would be, a mega model of the interdependencies among all of their different views of from each of the sciences. I do really like the asset-based idea, and I think that a lot of I guess that goes together with the abundance, the economy of abundance, or the thinking about how we're trained not to see the value of what we already have. For example, if you could add a price to the fact that we have common languages, the use of natural language would be valued in the trillions of dollars, because if you had to create from scratch the ability to coordinate everybody with a natural language, how could you put a price tag on that? So, that kind of thinking should shift people from this, the negativity of, the deficit thinking to abundance thinking. Now, I don't know a lot about it, but it is, I think that's really powerful. Anyway, so I mixed some things up there. I do think that there's a place for just using the ISM for understanding how how science explains how things work in a free from any problem focus. I guess another thing on that is that Comte in the 19th century taught astronomy to laborers. And he thought that, and he found they were very receptive. He thought that bringing scientific knowledge about how the world works to the underprivileged, underserved groups was inherently liberating. So you don't need to either talk about problems or assets in order to empower, if you can have a coherent big picture view through ISM of how the sciences fit together.
Right, which would all be pretty positive. I mean, it would just be a question of using ISM as a mediating process.
Yeah,
I think so. I think that's the most feasible for your work with systems literacy and the NSF.
Right.
Is to not have it be either overtly problem focused or asset focused, but understanding focused.
Right. So understanding focus, and then to construct the description of the project to present to the National Science Foundation, and to illustrate why. I mean, I think this is where the help I need is to, and I know it's sort of been a proverbial problem in a way, is to articulate why taking this approach is meritorious or preferable over other approaches.
What is it you want to accomplish?
What I want to accomplish is, over the past 15 years, I've worked on ocean literacy, and by that I mean bringing ocean scientists, educators, and policy folks together to agree about what every adult should know about the ocean. And that would be achieved by ensuring they learnt it in school by the time they graduate. And the same thing for earth science. So we got 150 earth scientists of different disciplines together to decide what is important. And the same thing happened for atmospheric scientists, and then energy scientists did it. And so you have earth, water, air, and fire as sort of four elements, if you will, energy, where we've got some agreements, and it would be good then to bring sort of more of those four into agreement, but to weave into that then, a living process that might be represented by a forest or our humanness, as in, the biology of love and our humanness, and some of the cybernetic ideas about how we indeed are in the world through our use of language. And so that's sort of the communities of interest or the areas of interest that I am seeking to bring into a discursive or this dialogic space that would also weave in the United States something called the Next Generation Science Standards, which have 7 cross-cutting concepts, which we feel need some illumination and some additional factors, which can be sort of an integrating integrating, cross-cutting, helping bring those topics together. So that's sort of the theme of what I'm shaping up to be my year as president of ISSS from 2018 to 2019, and that's the work that I would like to see done during that period, and see if we can't get some funding from the National Science Foundation in the United States to do that.
The earth science, that's geoscience?
It was it was all science. It was all related science. I mean, geoscience came out of the Geosciences Directors and USGS. So I mean,
because isn't, if you say Earth, it's like, is that the atmosphere? We're talking about the water on Earth.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a problem there with there's some confusion of categories. If you want to try to, there's a merology problem here. If you want to try to bring them all together, so that they form a whole.
Yeah.
Kevin could maybe take us through that. What is it? Merology or Mariology, or?
Yeah, Mariology.
Mariology. Yeah. Okay. So the parts, if these sciences are parts of some integrated view of Earth systems, or systems on planetary systems, or if the word Earth is labeled if one of the parts is labeled Earth, then what's the label for the whole Earth systems view? That's a problem. But you don't have bio.
Bio, yeah, I guess. Well, there isn't. One would have bio in some way. I mean, represented. Yes, I mean.
You need the bio and the social.
Yeah.
And then you would.
You'd be coming close, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So yeah, go on, Kevin.
I wasn't talking.
Whoever else was talking.
Okay. Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. And I think that some of the things that I'm hearing here are interesting about large-scale asynchronous engagement is one, and the other one is how does the ISM tool or the structural modeling tool help us do large-scale things? And I'll try to feed this a little bit. Chart that I have here on the value truth. That's what is the value of what we're doing, right?
Could whoever's,
of course, the factual truth.
Stop, because I can't hear what Joe's saying.
Oh, I think, yeah, someone has their microphone on. So that the factual truth is actually the state, the real world. And when we're looking at our structural modeling piece where we're gathering information from a group, that's factual truth, and that basically costs money, costs resources to do that. And then the formal truth is when we take the factual truth and put it in a certain format or form, then we can infer information and truth in a formal way, which uses much less resources than gathering individual facts. And then the value truth really is where we're talking about, well, just the value of using more or less resources in our process of structural modeling. That's a value. When you're talking about values within your communities or values with any type of organization. And a lot of conflicts are based on value conflicts. And what I hear Kevin talking about, I think is really great about the social networks, because when the structural modeling started, computing technology was just in its infancy and networking was just starting. And so you could do like they're doing with the nodes of human beings that are being fed by networks of other human beings. But still now, today, I think one of the things that's important to think about is to feed computing systems also into that, where we've actually agreed on certain things. And we have certain value systems, and we have certain types of technologies that we believe represent ground truth for us. So those are the things that I think are necessary to think about when you're talking about doing a process or designing a process. And when you do, and it's important to do a risk evaluation of that. And a simple risk evaluation would be, well, if I have the factual truth, how confident am I in this data that I've collected? So I collect this data, I have high confidence in it, and I can use a formal method, and I can have high confidence in the formal method. But if my factual data, right, I have low confidence in it, then, and I apply a formal method, then basically what I'm going to have there is I'm going to have low confidence in my formal method. So there's, you know, some type of provenance about how, you know, how much value or how much, you know, basically how much you trust the data that you're getting. And that, of course, will depend upon different communities. So that's something where we're going to, Mary and I'll be going next in our next report, and I just wanted to point that out. And what I hear a lot also is kind of a difference between design and discovery mode. And it's my understanding that ISM is a group learning and group discovery type of activity. And so that's group learning and discovery, but also in the context of design and incorporating existing known facts and information. So I think there needs to be some clarification on that, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as I said in our next report. So we got about another 12 minutes, so we'll be quiet. And open it up for comments from anybody else.
Right. So I agree with your distinction there, design discovery. That's helpful. The discovery, the process is to support discovery. It's supposed to be factual knowledge that then there would be some convergence on factual agreement, I assume. The value questions are in the, prior to getting into the framing. I guess the value questions are in the framing. Is that right, Kevin? The framing of what to talk about and how to talk about it.
Yeah, that's a good question. When in development of a triggering question, there's often a strategic ambiguity incorporated in the question so that it doesn't lean one way or the other, and it leaves it up to the participants to take a stand. But
and what they're taking a stand on, the content, as Joe says, should be factual. Is that right? The content is to discover factual assertions? Oh, I guess except for things like prioritizing, maybe some of the, at least deciding what's more important than what is explicitly value laden.
You know, in the early days, even before interpretive structural modeling, they were using just matrices to look at the connections of systems. And they were studying things like jet systems and urban planning. And, excuse me, and they were trying to develop, you know, functional models is a function of this heat pump. Does it depend on the function of the electrical outlet? Does the hydraulic system depend on the heat pump? And so they were trying to find kind of logical models of the physical systems. And what's happened over the years is that the techniques have moved into more value-laden questions, and still using the logical relations, but not necessarily things that would be considered facts and formals. In fact, not to use the pun, but Aleko Christakis and Tom Flanagan, and probably Ken Bausch, so these three kind of philosophers of structured democratic dialogue, they don't believe that there are such things as facts. Now, personally, I think that's a very dangerous position. That's the kind of position Trump takes. But they have kind of a postmodern view on whether there are such things as facts. Everything is observer dependent in their philosophy. I'm at odds with them on this, but what I'm trying to make the point is they do not see a distinction between these things, between these different types of truth in their philosophy. I disagree, but that's their philosophy.
Well,
They still hold on to what a relationship means, whether there is a logical relationship that is transitive. They still hold to that.
Why does that get special treatment?
Yeah, I don't know. But for example, when you get into values, you can't use, I don't know, you should try it sometime to do an ISM session on values, right? I've done it because I was forced to do it, because we were doing a project with two churches the future of a church. And this church was, what is it called? They're pacifists. They're also called the Friends, the Quakers.
Yes.
Okay? Now the Quakers wanted to talk about the future of their church because the young people were leaving and the congregation was elderly, and they had a young, vibrant minister who wanted to help them revive their hope, the sense of hope for their church. And they had they wanted to, Tom Flanagan, who was doing the design of the triggering question, he wanted to have people respond in the form of a gerund, which is a word that ends in ing, which is basically states of being, like loving and having faith and having hope. And so he was eliciting all these values. And I told him, because I knew the literature on this, they had worked with value systems back in the 70s when they were trying to do something called value engineering. And I told him everything's going to end up in one big cycle. Everything, love is intertwined with faith and hope, and all of these things are all totally interconnected. There's no sparsity to it, and ISM is not going to help you. Now, the interesting thing, and that's what happened. It all ended up in one big ball, except for one thing, which was, no, that was it. It ended up in one big ball. I'm thinking of another project. The interesting problem the Quakers had is they didn't believe in voting. So they had trouble answering the questions we put to them as a group. They used a process called communal discernment instead of voting. But anyway, I understand the demarcation that Joe's making, and generally I follow that, but people in an STD community don't, and I've worked with groups where they're really working in values, and ISM doesn't work so well in values unless you're sharing the values of a reason between two statements that you're making that are not values.
Yeah, that's the reason I brought this in. Is this in the classical systems engineering, system science literature? This is done by Hall, basically. Quite a bit of work done on it. I still want to start matching these concepts to different sub-processes in the structural modeling, and then start doing a risk analysis.
Yeah.
And so where is risk introduced? So we got about 3 or 4 more minutes.
Yeah.
I want to say that the way we treat this, and there is sort of a yes and solution, that the values of science are what guide you to recognize the existence of facts. So you don't have factual truth existing apart from the values that respect facts. I don't know, you can get to the values. You can't get to values from facts. You can get to facts from values. If it is recognized as important for the discipline of the group and the clarity of the ISM and the ability to use the formal methods to mean something, that people share values that will respect facts, now you have all 3 kinds in the consideration, and it's all value grounded. So it's not fact grounded where there are no people in the picture and the facts are dominant, and it's you end up in a scientistic worldview. It's value grounded, but it's valuing of the pursuit of facts. I guess there's a Peirce and Comte would say that scientific knowledge is an end state that we may never achieve, but that it is very helpful for us to have faith in that end state as something that guides our pursuit, and that we're always open to improving.
Yeah, I think that's what this chart says. This is about types of statements or how you would talk about these things, and value says methods applied to formal and factual sentences. So there's, basically value does include formal and factual components. And so it's just basically how do we, highlight these concerns, and then are there ways to express them that allow us to more easily incorporate computational assistance for the human beings?
Right.
And those are things that will be going forward in the next couple months.
There's no conflict from our point of view. That's a diversion to.
Okay. Well, is there anything else anybody would like to add here before we sign off?
Yeah, my experience is the facts sit on the nodes and the values are the rationale for the links. And that's how to elicit them.
Excellent.
Yes, that's good.
Anything else?
Peter, I've put my email address in the chat box for you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I
I'd
will
love to hear about your project.
I'd like to talk some more with you, so we'll arrange a time.
Okay.
Well, and with that, then I stop the broadcast, and we will meet again in 2 weeks, or well, the first Saturday in December.
That's
Take care.
December 2nd, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Yes. Happy
Yes.
Thanksgiving.